My main theme is indeed the marriage of Lloyd George and Frances Stevenson, which eventually took place at Arlington House, Guildford Registry Office in October 1943. When I was last afforded the immense privilege of addressing the Friends of the Library 4.5 years ago, January 2006, I took as my theme that complex, tempestuous relationship between Lloyd George and his first wife, Dame Margaret. And my story ended very, very sadly at Brynawelon, Cricieth, on the 20th of January 1941, when Maggie went to meet her maker. Today, that story continues. Now, although the couple had, of course, been semi-estranged for many, many years, spending only a relatively short time in each other's company each year, usually the month of August, Lloyd George was still totally devastated. Part of his grief could be explained by his unfortunate tragic failure to reach the deathbed scene in time. He'd been forced to spend the previous night at a hotel at Cerrig-y-Drudion in Denbighshire, en route from Churt to Cricieth, and he had to be informed, very sadly, of his wife's death over the telephone by the royal physician, his personal friend, Lord Dawson of Penn, who told him softly, "Your wife died at 10:20 this morning." The situation was, in the words of LG's PPS A.J. Sylvester, most pathetic. Lloyd George was totally broken up and he sobbed at the other end of the phone. I expressed my grief for him, and he sobbed still further. "Oh, Sylvester, she was a grand old pal." "You are very brave," I said to him. "No, I'm not," he said. Well, the following day, the London train was able to get through to Cricieth, carrying their 2 sons and their wives, Richard and June and Gwilym and Edna. Members of the family were then reunited in their profound grief at Brynawelon, Cricieth. The moving events of these days made a very, very deep impression upon A.J. Sylvester. I shall never forget LG's face when he drew up in the Rolls Royce, driven by Dyer. I've never seen anyone looking so near death himself. His face was an awful colour. Although there had been a very deep rift between father and eldest son, and Dick had long considered that his father had treated Dame Margaret shamefully for decades, LG fell into Dick's arms and sobbed hysterically. Only A.J. Sylvester and their son-in-law, Sir Thomas Carey Evans, who was a medical man married to the second daughter, Olwen, were sufficiently composed and in control to go and view the body of Dame Margaret lying in her coffin. She looked very peaceful. LG did not see her himself at all. I don't think he's ever seen death. He didn't even see Maya in her coffin. Neither did Dick or Gwilym see her. A little later, Sylvester met Megan in the hall at Brynawelon. She just fell into my arms. The scenes I witnessed between members of the family were most pathetic. And Thelma Caislet, who was the Conservative MP for Islington and a close personal friend to Megan Lloyd George, rushed to Brynawelon as soon as she heard of the death. The scenes she saw there confirmed her view that the Lloyd Georges were indeed a genuine circle, consisting of people who did not merely put up with each other, but were genuinely fond of each other, however much they had to put up with. Upon her arrival, Lloyd George threw his arms around me, burst into tears and sobbed out that he would never forget me coming there at that moment. Well, A.J. Sylvester was extremely loyal to Lloyd George throughout. he continued to serve him devotedly for more than 22 years. He was also very, very fond of Dame Margaret, who always took his side in the family squabbles. And for the rest of his life, until he died in 1989, he always strove to ensure that Dame Margaret was given the attention and respect which she deserved. He also enjoyed a good relationship with Meghan. But with Francis Stevenson, however, Sylvester's relationship was most uneasy. To her mind, he had displayed an enormous vanity when he had insisted that he must be known as Principal Private Secretary when he joined Lloyd George's staff in 1923. She had shrugged her shoulders and did not quibble, but a latent, simmering antagonism had developed between the two, which did not really burst out into the open until after Lloyd George's death in March 1945. She considered him vain, overambitious, and touchy. Behind his back, she mimicked him, made fun of his voice and his nasal twang, which overlay a marked Staffordshire accent, and his tendency to rub his hands together, which she said reminded her of Uriah Heep. Sylvester, in turn, accused her of being prim, stiff, and intent only on providing comfort for Lloyd George and her own personal self-seeking. Well, Maggie's funeral took place 3 days after her death, the 23rd of January 1941. Private service at Bryn y Wylon, Lloyd George again overcome with grief and floods of tears. The coffin was then borne 2 miles to the Criccieth Public Cemetery on a traditional simple farm wagon pulled by 65 members of the Criccieth Home Guard, each of them carrying a private wreath. Lloyd George, sobbing, rode behind the farm wagon with his 2 sons, his brother William, and little David, the elder son of William Lloyd George, 10 years of age. There were to be no women at the cemetery. The sheer sadness of the situation was much increased by the fact that Dame Margaret was being buried in the family grave, the mausoleum, which had been originally opened for their adored daughter, Mair Eluned, died at the family home at Ruth Road, London, at just 17 years of age in 1907, November 1907, when her father was president of the Board of Trade under Campbell Bannerman. The originally simple grave of 1907 had been turned into a Lloyd George family vault. And the last words which Mair supposedly uttered on earth, "He is just and merciful," had been engraved by Sir William Goscombe on the gravestone. 33 years later, the family vault was now being reopened for the burial of Dame Margaret. Wrote Sylvester, "Lloyd George, standing between Dick and William, trembled and sobbed uncontrollably, but he bore his grief bravely. Dame Margaret would have been delighted if she could have seen the whole thing. I have been to many important funerals. None was as impressive as this. And on the mountainside behind stood Mynydd Ednyfed Fawr Criccieth, where Maggie had been born 76 years earlier and where she had spent her childhood and her youth."